This is GDC Podcast, episode 3.
Remixing the radio host voice a little bit.
I should super. This is GDC Podcast, episode 3. Hey everybody, we are back. I am Kris Graft, Editor-in-Chief of Gamasutra. I'm here with my co-host, Alissa McAloon.
Hello, I'm Alissa. I am the news editor over at Gamasutra.
You are. You're also the associate publisher.
Yeah. I think you explained it. My job is to stare at the website all day recently.
Yeah. That was the only requirement on the job description. Must be willing to stare at a game industry website for
the refrigerator in control. You just got to make sure nothing bad happens.
Oh yeah. Oh, I haven't gotten to the refrigerator in control.
Oh well, spoilers.
Yeah,
there's a refrigerator in control.
It's been spoiled. You fight a refrigerator and everybody hates it. Welcome back. This is episode 3. We haven't been canceled yet by the bigwigs at Game Developers Conference. We have managed to stagger our way through 2, and hopefully we can make it through 3 without any major, issues.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's the way to jinx it. So like knock on wood or whatever superstition you subscribe to right there.
We are doing so good. It's perfect. This is going to be the longest lasting podcast ever created. So before we get into our next guest is huge, by the way. She's just basically, she's Forbes 30 under 30. I never got that. It's too late for me. I've got 2 years to do something impressive, so we'll see if that. Yeah, clock's ticking. Yeah, and she was, I'm not going to spoil anything yet, but she was also the IGF host. The Independent Games Festival host I'm not going to even tell you the year because, that's going to give it away, but it was pretty recent. And she's even a multiple times GDC speaker. So, but we're not going to quite bring her in yet. What have you been up to, Alissa? What have you been playing?
I got my PC back up and running after it was out of commission. I killed my motherboard somehow.
How'd you do that?
Don't know. I hope it doesn't happen again because I got a new one that I spent a lot of money on.
Yeah, you're not supposed to just pour water on your computer, right?
Yeah, no, I'm learning that. Like I'm going to use coasters
before.
when I set things on top of my computer from now on, I think.
Yeah, that's good. That's how I do it now too. No one told me that you're not supposed to pour water directly on electronics.
Just pro gamer tips here at the GDC Podcast.
Yeah. This is for game developers and if you want random tips on electronic.
No, I was talking to someone on Twitter.com the other day, and they reminded me that Disco Elysium comes out. So I stayed up until 11 putting the pile of parts I'd compiled into my computer and getting everything working, just so I could play this game today.
Yeah, wow. And that's made by, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Zaum.
Yeah, Zaum.
But there's also like a slash right in the middle.
It's very stylish, just like the game.
Yeah, the game is very stylish. What do you find stylish about Disco Elysium from Zaum?
It's got that good art. So I think we've both only managed to play 15, 20 minutes of it on our lunch breaks today.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got really stylish looking art. The writing is it's like being at a cool little poetry night that a friend of yours invited you to, and just kind of jazzy feel to it. And the voice acting's great, and the first 15 minutes of that game, super fun.
Yeah, it is kind of poetic. It's also got prose for days, and so far I've had a tie speak to me. It lets you get in your own head, and you have this inner voice that's talking to you, and you talk to it, and apparently inanimate objects talk to you as well. I like the unexpected weirdness of it. Yeah, no, it's really weird how conversations come out of nowhere, and because it's RPG depending on how you build your character at the beginning, it's got that kind of Fallout 2-esque where if you just have zero intelligence, you will just try to hit things with a rock instead of opening doors. It's got that kind of writing, but on this really really, really poetic, and it's just good. Yeah.
It's
Well, I'm
good.
looking forward to putting some more time into that. Yeah, so big GDC news this week. Registration is open. You can actually go buy some tickets and go now. Well, you can't go now.
I mean, you could plan ahead a little bit. Just show
Yeah,
up incredibly early. Punctuality is important, but
yeah. Try not to show up 5 months early.
shoot for March.
Yeah, it's shooting for March. So that stuff is all live on the website now at gdconf.com. And speaking of other GDC things, which we kind of like to do here on the morning announcements, we're on YouTube now, right?
Yeah. So
the
far,
podcast.
yeah, the podcast. Well, us also, but so far the first 2 episodes are live up there, and this one will be once it's live probably as well too. Episode 1 is talking to Grant Schonkweiler about game production, and episode 2 is talking to Matthew Burns about designing neat and compelling choices. So you should give them both a listen. They're really insightful.
Give them a listen, and then give them a thumbs up. And then
like, subscribe, and the bell icon is YouTube's thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't YouTube a ton, but
Oh, you're not a professional YouTuber then?
no, only the GDC YouTube channel.
Yeah. Cool. You know what else happened as far as GDC stuff? GDC stuff happened. We closed out the IGF submissions. We ended up getting 550 entries. So that is off to the judging process. That's a lot of games.
I know a few people, I think, who are IGF judges that were talking about it and just kind of like cracking their knuckles to sit down at the keyboard because that's a lot of games to go through.
Yeah. Do you think they cracked the knuckles? Let me see
I
if
mean,
can get this.
you have to for like cinematic effect, right? You do the little like flex, then you start like Hacker
That's
Man.
how I start every workday.
Typing at your keyboard, yeah.
Yeah, and there's like submissions have closed. Like I've seen, the talks that I can't talk about any of this, but there's just going to be a lot of really cool talks at GDC 2020. I was not paid to say that specifically. I'm literally I literally get paid by the company that runs GDC. So I guess, but I really believe that. Yeah, GDC 2020 has some really cool stuff coming up, and I frankly cannot wait.
And GDC kicks off on March 16th of 2020, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
March
coming
16th
up.
to 20th. It's practically here.
Oh my gosh, I don't like
Yeah.
that. Well, I do like that, but like the concept
know
of
what you
time
mean.
moving too quickly.
Yeah. I can't. Yeah. Well, speaking of moving, I think that we should get our next guest on. Alyssa and I are kind of excited about this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is kind of. Does indie game dev have royalty? What kind of political system does it use? I would say that if there was some kind of royalty or monarchy, our next guest would qualify.
No, I'm a plebe.
Oh, there she is.
Don't worry, I'm just a scrub.
Okay. Our next guest, we're very excited for this scrub. She is known for making these brilliant and intensely personal games. She is currently a game designer at Tacoma developer Fulbright, while also doing these other really great personal games. Known for the IGF Nuovo Award winning Sybil, which is a game about falling in love in an online game. How do you do it? Where you like take dolls and you try to figure out how they do it sexually, and also recently released the really great vignette formatted game called We Met in May. So here we go. Welcome to the podcast, Nina Freeman.
Thank
Hi.
you. Happy to be here.
So for people who aren't familiar with you, and they should be, can you talk a little bit about your background in game development?
Sure. Like you said, right now I'm a game designer at Fulbright in Portland, Oregon, and before that I was based in New York City, so that's kind of where I got my start My way back background is in English literature. I did like a lot of poetry stuff back when I was in school. And then I got kind of into the New York City game development scene through some friends who were doing like indie game stuff at the time. And through them, I like got super involved with going to like game jams in New York and different events like Baby Castle stuff and whatnot. And that's kind of how I got started, was just going to these things with my friends and making tiny games with them and participating in local events and stuff. And yeah, even like a lot of the early stuff I was working on was still like personal stuff. Not all of it was, because, you know, I'm doing game jams with my friends, but I was really into like personal writing and poetry. So I since that's what I was doing and that's how I learned to write, I sort of instantly brought that over into my game development life. And during that time, that's when I worked on How Do You Do It with a bunch of my friends in New York and a bunch of other games. Sybil sort of came out of that as well, although I ended up working on that pretty heavily when I was in grad school at NYU and their integrated digital media program. And then shortly after, I got a job at Fulbright and worked on Tacoma as a level designer, and still worked on my own personal projects on the side, again, with lots of different friends. I always work with sort of different teams on each side project. But yeah, so I've been doing Fulbright stuff and otherwise keeping up with my smaller games work on the side. So that's sort of my background.
Great. Yeah, so all of you aspiring game developers listening right now, that's exactly how you get into the game industry, and that's how you just have to do it.
Follow it beat for beat and guaranteed success.
Solved.
It's always interesting to hear how many like people in games. I'm a former English major. I graduated with an English for New Media degree, and I think like 2 other people at Gamasutra are too, and a bunch of like people in games. So it's always interesting to see how that like spirals out into different careers in game development.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, what else? I mean, I also have an English degree, and then I end up I'm doing a podcast now. So I guess, you know, it's also how you get into podcasts. So English degrees, game dev, or podcasting. That's how you do it.
Very multifaceted.
Yeah. So it's interesting also just academia leading into this career. There are lots of young people. There's always that question, you know, do I need to get like a game design degree or game development degree does that improve my chances of becoming a game developer, or does it matter?
I think it really depends on the situation. I mean, school in general is like always going to be good, right? Like, you know, getting an education is good, but it can be super expensive. So like the only reason I was able to do undergrad and then grad school was because of like the immense amount of financial aid I got, because I did not come from a rich family. So I was really lucky in that sense. But I think like go to school if you can afford it and you're not going to completely be like in debt for the rest of your life. And if you know, can't really afford it, there's a lot of other ways to build up what you would get from school. I think the best thing you can get out of school for games is like a portfolio and a body of work, and also like being a part of a social space where developers are giving each other feedback. I think those are the 2 most important things that you can get out of school, but you can find that just in the real world too. Like I had that when I was getting into the game scene in New York, just because there was so many like community events, not like that weren't academia related. And I really got my start making games in that environment where I was like just with friends, people in school and people not in school at local stuff. So I think it really depends on your situation, but I wouldn't put yourself in debt for school personally. Just make stuff, like ship stuff, put it online, meet people, get feedback, actively seek that stuff out, and just like build a portfolio if you're in school or not. For some people, school makes that a lot easier, and if you need that, that's totally fine. But yeah, don't go into too much debt. Yeah.
It's tricky. It's a tricky thing.
It is.
Yeah. So let's talk about your games a little bit. I I had played Cibele in the past, but I hadn't played all the way through it because I just I don't know. I have the attention span of a caterpillar. Something. But yeah, so I did actually play through it recently again, and it's completely brilliant. Can you kind of can you explain the background of that game for people who aren't familiar with it, and what you were trying to do with it?
Yeah. So Sybil, sort of the beginning of it actually hilariously happened when I was in school. I was at NYU in grad school. And I was in Bennett Foddy's prototype studio class, which was the class where we made a game a week for a whole semester. Like, it was like a game jam a week, basically. Each week had a theme. One of the weeks, my friend Francesca and I were like, let's have the theme be sex. We just decided we want it to be because we make games about that. So we forced that theme on the class, which was funny. And so out of that theme came the idea for Sybil, and I made like a little prototype for it, which was really cool. And I was into it and wanted to work on it more, and Bennett encouraged me to work on it more. And I had a bunch of friends who I'd been jamming with, so Emmett Butler and Decky Koss, who had both done How Do You Do It with me. Emmett doing a lot of code with me, and Decky was the musician, sound designer, and I did design stuff. So I took the prototype to them and was like, hey, do you want to work with me again? And then Rebecca Dunlap came on. She's an illustrator in New York, really talented, and I knew her, so I invited her to work on it too. So it started out as like a small project that came out of a class. I decided to do it for my thesis. It's based on my real experience playing Final Fantasy XI as a like teenager and falling in love with this guy, and him and I met up and had sex, and that was the first time either of us had sex. And then, yeah, the game is about how he kind of just, like, bounces after that, and it's...
Oh, spoilers!
Sort of yeah, spoiler. Well, it's like, I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard game to spoil because it's more about the details, I think. The mechanics and design of it are kind of inspired by games like Gone Home, which are games where you experience the story through the things you find in the space. It's a combination of that with a lot of sort of voiceover stuff, so... That's kind of how that game got started.
What did the prototype for Sybil, because it's like simulating, it's your desktop, quote unquote. What did that game in its early stages look like?
So the prototype was like a little pixel art 2D game that was basically the same as what ended up being like the game in a game of Sybil. So if people haven't played it, in Sybil, it's like you're playing as this girl who's playing an online game, and you have access to her desktop, and then you also play the online game she's playing with this guy she likes. So the prototype was the online game part of that. And in the prototype, it was all, I didn't really have time for voice. There was like a little voice, so it was like some voiceover of her talking, and then text from him in the chat, like, the fictional chat in the game. And there was just like a little conversation of them flirting, and you would just walk around and like kill enemies. And his NPC didn't really do anything because I didn't have time in a week to like make an AI or like even a scripted character. So yeah, it was just a really simple expression of that online game aspect of what Sybil ended up being.
It's so interesting because you feel like you're playing with this person, and the way that you describe it, it's kind of a simple idea.
It captures a lot of like, I've had partners that I've communicated with normally through just playing online games together, playing Destiny together for like hours and hours and hours, and like it captures the thing where the games kind of becomes background noise to the actual like conversations and relationships developing through that, and like that was captured very well in your game.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to I think MMOs are funny because I think they're like super, it's easy to forget how simple they are. Like if you strip back all the layers of like different leveling systems, different job classes, different whatever, like in the end, a lot of them are just like you click on stuff to kill it. So I also kind of wanted to make a parody of how that's really what a lot of those old MMOs are. So Yeah, I was trying to capture that for sure.
You called it out in the writing too. Just like, what are we doing right now? They're just smashing stuff.
I mean, after I played Final Fantasy 11 from like age 14 to 19, like a lot. So I was fully prepared to like get down and make fun of it, even though it's a game I adore. But, you know, when you think about a lot of games like that, it's like a lot of it really is, a lot of the interesting parts of it come out of the social interactions you have. And the fact that they're really simple games actually makes socializing a lot easier, I think. And that's like an interesting thing about those games that comes out of the simplicity of the mechanics. And I was like excited about that when working on Cibele for sure.
Yeah. Alyssa, are you an MMO person?
I've tried to be and failed several times. I played Final Fantasy 11 when I was like an early teen with no money to afford the monthly subscription fee, and my mom wasn't very receptive to you want to pay this money every month to play a video game, so that one didn't last very long.
Oh, come on, Mom.
Yeah. Stuff like Destiny, though, and like how more and more live games are kind of becoming the modern MMO in a way, where those communities now form around these games that, I don't know, can be played single player, but you can just kind of like tune them out and play them multiplayer, just go in these loops forever without having to commit like 80 hours to beating the primary story of Final Fantasy 14 or something. And it's nice.
Yeah.
Video games are good.
I don't know how. I don't know why I can't either. Well, I kind of know why I haven't gotten into. I have a friend who's like has been really on and off into World of Warcraft since it first came out, and every time I try to play with him, like I'll skip a day playing with him, and the next thing I know, I play with him and he's like level like a million on like a flaming awesome horse mount with all this arms. Like, what? It's like, oh yeah, I played it for 24 hours straight since last. It's like, well, now there's nothing for me to do. I'm just gonna be like a little wimpy guy, and I just feel like I missed out. Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm just old too. It's interesting too. Speaking of being old, like being a 39-year-old dad playing Cibele, and you kind of I don't know. It's like you end up you empathize with it in a different way than you would if I was a young woman. Where
we talked about this a little bit ahead of in DMs, where you're like, oh, my dad like instincts are just going crazy, and I'm like, no, the tone of this. I have talked to these guys online before. I have had this guy being like, you want to send me a picture, and I'm like, it's too real, and I didn't like it in that way.
And so to kind of talk about that, the personal nature of your games, People are making more of them. Like, what do you feel like is your process for making a game that is just so incredibly personal and autobiographical?
I am the type of game designer that really likes sort of a research-driven process. So for Sybil, for example, I'm like a notorious archiver of everything in my life, and so I have this flash drive with like everything from all my computers since I was a teenager. So I was able to like go back and read a lot of like actual conversations I had back then, like with my online friends and with the guy that the game is like based on. So I had a lot of like source material to draw on, and then I also like went on the Wayback Machine and dug up some of my old blogs and stuff from even earlier than the game, just to like give myself some context to like get in the character's head to like write that voice accurately. And I actually found on YouTube a video of my old Final Fantasy 11 Link Shell doing this like big fight, so I could hear that guy's voice again. And so I even found that. So I like gather, when I do a personal game, I gather as much like real stuff as I can, especially if it's something that happened a long time ago. Although with something like more new, like We Met in May, which is about myself and like my current partner, Jake, like the research for that is a little different. It's mostly like conversations between us about like whatever the dates we've been on, because there's not as much of like a digital trail left by that game, because it's like about real physical dates we went on. We have like pictures from them and stuff, so that helps. But yeah, I try to like research in whatever way is appropriate for like the kind of game I'm making.
When you're like using yourself as a character, like feeling like writing something autobiographical about events you've been through, it would be really easy to just kind of be like, here's my recollection of that, and that's how it is. But like things are so much more multifaceted than that. Like when you're using your past self as a character, how do you kind of like detach from your current self in order to make that as accurate or true as possible?
It depends on the topic, but for something more serious like Sybil, or like, an emotionally painful memory, I have to like give it a lot of time. So I like didn't even consider writing that until I think it was like it had been like 8 years since I had that experience, and then maybe like 7, and then I'm like, I think I have enough critical distance from it to like look back and be able to like look at myself in like third person and like not like it's me and not have any like emotional investment in it. So the timing depends on the specific situation or memory I'm drawing on, but I try to I make sure I have like the critical distance from it to like look at it for what it was. And also the source material helps a lot with that, because if I have real text to draw on, I just use that and like I'll edit it so it makes more sense. But like a lot of Cibele is just literally things I said or things that guy said. So yeah, I have that kind of like, I don't even talk about myself in the first person when I make games like that. It's always like I talk about Nina like as if she's someone else. So that helps.
Yeah, wow. So you just basically copy paste all the chat logs and then just
some of them were actually pretty much copy pasted. Not all of them. Most of it was pretty edited, because like with something like that, there's like a lot that happens and is said between two people that can kind of like distract from the point of the story or like the emotional tones I'm trying to hit. So there's a lot of like filtering out of like things that were really said but really didn't matter in the end, that I can recognize now that I'm like so far out of it. Whereas when you're in the moment, you're like picking on every single little detail and trying to read into everything, or at least that's kind of how I was at that age. But now I can take that story and like distill it into something more straightforward. So I guess that's like another element of the process.
It's also interesting because you're like now a couple times removed from the original experience. Is it weird for you to talk about these personal games that are about a specific period in your life, about a specific thing?
I'm so used to talking about them that it doesn't really faze me anymore.
Okay.
I mean, when I'm working on them, I don't know, it sounds weird, but I have a very like distant approach. Like I'm not like emotionally involved in it at all, really. Like I'm doing it for the art of it. And that's not true for everything I've made. Like Sybil is one example, but like I think when I made Freshman Year, which is a story about like a sort of like sexual assault situation I was in, that was like a little more emotional and I couldn't remove myself from it as easily. But even then I can still like talk about it. I think a lot of it just comes with experience too, just like getting used to talking about this kind of thing. Yeah,
I was gonna ask, but now the question doesn't make as much sense. But I was gonna ask, was it ever difficult for you to put yourself out there in the way that you do through your games? But I guess it just depends on the subject matter. Yeah,
it definitely depends on the subject. And also I benefited a lot from my English degree, actually. Well, because I did poetry, like was my focus. So I was in a lot of like poetry writing, like creative writing classes. And in those, you're like sharing your work face to face with people. And my professor, Charles North, he like was having us write a lot of personal work. So at a really like pretty young age, I was already talking about like pretty like personal and like sometimes dark stuff like to classmates I wasn't even close with. And I think that experience made it a lot easier for me to do in the end. That was like the practice that I got that prepared me to do it on a larger scale.
Was anyone ever like, geez, Nina?
No, I mean, everyone was writing like intense stuff, English majors.
Sure. Yeah. Yep, I do.
Flashing back to a very specific day in my poetry class.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what is it about, relationships and sexuality that lend themselves to game mechanics? I mean, I can imagine some answers to this, but
It can kind of be like a taboo topic too, like talking about sexuality and romance just as they are, and the goods and the bads, but also like based on real situations is like, oh my gosh. But
well, I mean, again, I think I got used to it in the poetry time. I actually remember we like had this whole like erotic poetry thing that we were doing at school, and like, so that got me more used to it. But anyway, regardless, I had the experience coming into it, which helped. But more related to like game design, my biggest interest as a game designer is games that like help you embody a character. And I think player character embodiment is like it's a performative thing. So it's almost like theater, like you're playing as the character, almost like you're on a stage. And that was kind of the motivation behind the design of Cibele, for example, where, it's like first person, you're supposed to be like at her computer as her doing all these things. Like it's like role playing, but more in a theatrical sense in my mind.
It's like zeroth person. You're like the the person. It's your desktop.
And a part of that process for me is always like, I think the memories I like to draw on the best for like personal games especially are things that have a very like physical element that I think could translate well into game mechanics. So I like to have the story first and find a game mechanic in the story. So in Sybil, it's the act of like sitting at the computer, looking through your files and playing the game. That is like a physical experience. And that's how those mechanics came out of that. Or in How Do You Do It, the physicality of like playing with your dolls and moving them around in silly and awkward ways, and the physical experience of that. And I haven't done that kind of design for like literally everything I've done, but it's one of my big interests. And I think, sex and relationships and sexuality, like there's lots of sort of stories within that space that are so physical. So I think there's a lot of territory to be explored there mechanically. I
think one thing I noticed when I did like a quick brush up on like as many of your games as I could find this morning, just to make sure it was all fresh, and going through We Met in May, and how each of the different vignettes has their own kind of mechanic that goes with it, but the mechanics feel very tied to kind of the absurdity or the romance or the intimacy of the situation, and that just all comes across as like the mechanics as the vehicle for narrative versus kind of like a game where it would distract you from the narrative or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I've gone both directions. Like Kimmy is a game I worked on. That's more of like a visual novel style game, which is another genre I really like. So it just depends on what you're going for. But I think it's exciting to like look for the mechanics in the story. Like how can you have the player like step into the character's shoes and like actually perform as them in a physical way. So yeah.
I played through We Met in May this morning, and it's hilarious.
Thank you.
It's just I mean it's already like kind of on game blogs and game sites, so no spoilers, but you do tweak Nina's boyfriend's nipples in it while he's trying to make a meal. Yep. And it's just so funny, like how evocative it is, like with emotions. Like it's so playful. Can you talk about incorporating this playfulness and how you zero in on that?
So first We Met in May, Jake and I made it together, and we had all these fun dates, and like one of our first dates was this one where we were at the beach and we discovered we both really like sand and like rolling around in the sand and stuff, which a lot of people think is weird apparently, but I grew up like right next to a beach, so I'm like, I don't know, it's just like what I always did. And he did too, so we like bonded over that. And then we were like talking about that experience with some friends. They were making fun of us for liking sand, and we were like, oh yeah, like that would make a pretty interesting game, and then we could like show people that liking sand isn't weird. So like the idea came from like kind of a playful place for us, and like we especially as someone like me who have made a lot of like kind of darker games about romance and stuff, I wanted to really try getting back into like the comedic and lighter side of things, like what we had done with How Do You Do It back in the day, for example. That's like a much more lighthearted game, even though it tackles something kind of serious in a way. So yeah, Jake and I were like, let's like pick find some dates we've been on that we thought were really funny or memorable in some way, and like see what was funny and memorable about those and translate them into a game and find the game mechanics in those moments. So we came into it with like romantic comedy as a goal. So we're glad it comes across.
Yeah, it definitely does. So the in your games, there's always this like visually, it just fits. Everything is so cohesive.
Thanks.
What are your thoughts on the aesthetics of and how that plays into the storytelling aspect? I mean, you can talk about specific games like how do you do it, or anything.
Yeah. So for all the different games I've worked on, it's usually a lot of them have been with like many different artists. Like I haven't worked with the same artist multiple times, just because of like these being like side projects and all of us, many of them being done when I was a student and stuff. I wasn't like building a company or like anything like that yet. So it was just like, which of my friends wants to make a game today kind of thing. But I always would reach out to artists whose work I really liked, and I try not to be the type of designer that like micromanages an artist. I kind of just like, if I am into someone's style, I'm working with them for that reason, and we usually relate over that. So, yeah, my collaborative process with artists is always like, I just like what you do. Do that with me, please. But out of that comes a lot of really cool stuff. So, like, how do you do it is a good example. Marina Kataka did the art for that game, and I actually did work with her a couple times. She released Anodyne 2 recently with Sean. They're a pair of game developers that have been working on stuff. We're like old friends. It's funny. We all I know Marina through Sean, who's a friend from New York. So anyway, small world of game developers. Marina's great. Anodyne 2 is super good. She is a super talented artist with a really good eye for design stuff too, game design stuff and writing. So when we were working on that game, I like storyboarded what I had envisioned for how do you do it. And actually originally it was more focused on the hands. And the dolls in her hands. But Marina came back to me with a reverse view that included her face, because she was like, I really want to draw her expressions because I think that is super evocative for this concept. And I was like, great, yeah, sounds perfect. Like, I'm so glad that you thought of that, because that really makes the game what it is. So, yeah, my process with artists has always been really collaborative in that way for the design, too, because the visual design of the games matters a lot to me.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny, too, how in your games there you add, like, a point system. That doesn't really, it's unclear of how exactly it works.
They all have a logic behind them, but it's not... it doesn't really matter.
It seems like it's kind of like ever. Poking fun at the gamification of things sometimes. And yeah,
I don't know, I think to me as a game designer it's important to not take traditional game mechanic expectations too seriously, because I think it's more interesting if you try and poke fun at them or use them in a weird way. So yeah, I do my best to try doing that where it makes sense. And yeah, I've done that a lot with scores, because I think they're silly.
Yeah, I was pretty proud of my my high score on. We met in May when I was putting clothes, or when you were putting clothes on. I was putting. Yeah, they come out and then Jake just goes ragdoll. So so this is how it works. Apparently Nina and Jake went on a date where she's trying clothes on at a clothes shop. And then she comes out of the dressing room, and then depending on how you come out of the dressing room, which you can choose, you'll just literally blow her boyfriend off of his feet, and his character model, damaged numbers come up, and he just goes ragdoll.
So a hidden leaderboard somewhere for whoever's tweaked the nips the most times. Or...
I would have loved to do that. I mean, some of this stuff actually also comes down to scope or time.
Yeah.
So there's actually a ton of other stuff I wanted to do when we met in May that we just literally didn't have time for, because it's we're both so busy. Actually, Jake also started working at Fulbright recently, so it's hilarious how we both started having really working a day job and making a game on the side is pretty hard. So the silliness of the scoring also sometimes comes out of like, well, I don't have too much time to think about this, so what's like the funniest thing that comes to mind first? And yeah, so sometimes the smaller the scope, the sillier your game might end up. Turns out.
Both we met in May and what was the other one? I wrote it down. Game Jam games. Both started as Game Jam. Cibele, right?
Sybil, yeah.
Yeah. What? Well, I guess. How many Game Jam games have you put together all together, and like, what's the secret sauce for taking the concept of a jam game and making it its own thing?
Oh gosh, how many jam games have I made? Like, so many. I think, honestly, almost all of the games I've worked on started at jams, just because I like working that way. So, probably done like 14 or 15 game jams at this point. And oh god, actually way more than that, because that prototype studio class was like a whole semester of game jams.
Oh my god,
I actually don't even know. And like most of those aren't released.
Yeah.
Sybil came out of that, and also Bum Rush, which was a game I did for No Quarter a long time ago. So I would say like game jams are really good, because I think people can get caught up too much in the details or the implementation when working on a game, when sometimes like the best game design can come out of like spontaneity and just like hacking something together and like taking the shortest road to something playable. So I've always tried to have that approach where I like don't worry too much about the technicalities and just try to make something that people like either enjoy or like understand the story I'm trying to tell, or whatever my goal is. What matters most to me is that I can put it in front of someone and have them like come away with whatever I intend. And I think game jams are a really good way to like be quickly iterative, because iteration I think is one of the most important things to game design. Is like making something, putting it in front of a player, seeing how they react, and then tailoring the game further based on that feedback you get. And doing that over and over and over until your game works. So basically the game jam is usually like the first iteration of that, and gives me at least a base to work with. Then maybe sometime I refactor it, and no, not always. But regardless, like building it out after the jam just ends up being like more iteration like that. It's just maybe not all in one weekend, like spread out in a more reasonable way.
Suppose like starting a project in like a game jam where you are in a fixed time window keeps you from like lingering too well on making one thing work just right, or falling into those kind of fallacies.
Yeah, or like trying too many things, because a lot of games fall apart from being just like too much stuff, too many mechanics or whatever, and I think jams can like force you to be focused. So that's something that helps me a lot. And as someone who like has always had full-time jobs where like I'm doing other stuff, it also gives me deliberate time to like work on something outside of work. And sometimes like, as a busy adult or whatever, having that like time where I'm like explicitly just doing that one thing really helps me get it done. Yeah. And I care first and foremost really about finishing things. I tend to like, even if I'm not happy with the jam game at the end, I'll just release it anyway, as long as my teammates are okay with it. Just because like I care a lot about like just like putting it out there and being like, it's done. I don't like leaving things hanging. So jams are great.
Are you somebody who is constantly like in the back of your mind, oh, this could be a game?
I do have like a bunch of notes on my phone and in various Google Docs about different game ideas I come up with while I'm just like walking around or whatever. But actually, it's kind of a bummer. Like, I used to have more of that when I was living in New York and walking around all the time. And ever since I moved to Portland, it's still a walking city, but I find myself like having less ambient time just traveling. And so I've like had less of that over the years and have had to like more deliberately like sit down and brainstorm occasionally. I think leisure time is really important to coming up with like good ideas. So I have to, but I have to I'm at a point in my life where I have to like schedule that in, So.
Yeah, that's the game. Scheduling leisure time.
Yeah. It's
on spreadsheets secretly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of winding down here. So before you go, I just wanted to ask too for people listening and people familiar with your work or who would like to, do similar stuff, that's personal. What should people who want to make, these kind of really intensely personal games keep in mind?
I think familiarizing oneself with like other, personal games that have been done, like Dysphoria, for example, was really a big inspiration to me when I was getting started. Playing a lot of other games and like keeping up with that stuff can really help, and just like seeing what's been done and making sure to not only do that, but also look to other mediums, because, like poetry, for example, has a long history of personal writing. And you could say the same about film or painting or anything else that has that kind of history. Like, people do personal work all the time. And I think it's important to engage with that work, just to like give yourself ideas and find inspiration. And when you do have those ideas, write them down and try to act on them. Try to make something really small and finish it and like actually like release it and show it to people. I think that those two things, like the act of like engaging with other mediums and also being like looking at other games and making something small and finishing it and releasing it, are like two of the most important things, at least in my experience.
And of course, get an English degree like we all do.
I mean, I'm glad I got it, but I'm always like, I don't know, it's interesting. I like a lot of my friends like don't have any college degree, and like I think you can do games with or without. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is that you make stuff. And don't let anyone like look down on you if you don't have a degree, or if you don't have a degree from an Ivy League or whatever. Like, what matters in the end is your work, and like your creative output and like that stuff. So that's my belief, especially like having been doing games for a while now. I never ask about people's academic history. I just look at what they've made and play their games, and that's what I react to. So yeah.
Well, there you have it. Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your day, and best of luck with, I'm sure you have multiple projects in the works, and we'll keep an eye out for them. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we're back, and Nina's super interesting, right? Even though she considers herself a plebe scrub and not indie royalty.
A high-ranking plebe scrub.
Yeah, no, I think
for all of us to aspire to.
Yeah, she's absolutely royalty. Yeah, what did you think about that? What were some of the things you that are just your mind is still reeling over right now?
I like games that like the narrative just like knocks you off their feet, and like all of Nina's games seem to like accomplish that, where it feels like real people and real stories. And like I guess that's because they are based on real people and real stories, but like even when you do that, it's incredibly easy to lean into, I don't know, the idea of somebody or the idea of a situation and not have it feel authentic. But like all of hers do have that like authentic feel to them, maybe because she's able to kind of like look back and detach a little bit and go through her archives of teenage poetry and everything like that. That's the secret to writing good characters, maybe, is teenage poetry. But
right. Yeah, it's like total honesty, and then turning it into a story that other people can experience. And her ability to compartmentalize things, even what kind of surprised me, and maybe it shouldn't have, for Cibele, that she basically went back and internet stalked herself so that she could remember this experience from several years ago.
The phrase "Wayback Machine" to find forum posts like sent a shiver through my spine.
Yeah, like, oh my, seriously, as people who work on the internet, there's just this crap that we've made or written just in all kinds of places, probably archived in certain places. And just to think that, actively going out and trying to find that.
I think the current, I guess my generation, right where I'm at, I think Nina and I are about the same age, somewhere in there, where I feel like exposure to the internet started in about the teenage years when all those hormones and drama was running high. So that kind of weird artifact of your entire teenage frozen in time for you to look back on for inspiration later. I've mentioned this before, but I have my childhood computer, because my dad works in IT, so I got a hand-me-down computer that I had in my bedroom as a teen, and there's still all these MSN chat logs on there, just all these embarrassing conversations I had with my anime group friends and all of that. But especially going into the next generation who's always online, having all of this potential research material to turn around and maybe their personal games will blow us out of the water someday.
I think that all of our
mind-blowing.
I think all of our listeners should know that the next GDC podcast is just going to be Alissa reading out all of her MSN chat logs about anime.
It'll be me talking about all the fan fiction I wrote with friends that I will never give usernames for under penalty of death. Yeah,
it's going to be, if we're going to take Nina's advice and we're just going to really, get personal here. We're going to talk about all of those things.
I don't even know where to go from there. I'm just dwelling on all the embarrassing Inuyasha fan fiction I made in The Sims 1 back in the day, and
Oh yeah, no, I think it would be good actually.
Yeah. So video game. Back to Nina's game.
Yeah, We Met in May is just and stuff like Cibele and and How Do You Do It. They drill down so deep into a certain emotion that. Yeah, it's just pure focus and pure honesty and pure authenticity, and I really admire that. You just don't see that so often.
It's really interesting to hear how both those two games in particular evolved from jam games, because it was a memory and a concept that started as a small thing, and then once the weekend session was done, where it was able to expand and evolve. And I feel it's the reason I asked about how many game jams she'd done to date is because you can have a million ideas and try a million prototypes and stuff like that. They're not always going to work out, but then the ones that stick and the ones that you focus on and that you land on can evolve into these really evocative and cool things, like a lot of her games have.
Yeah, and the autobiographical nature of these, it just kind of it blows my mind, because I was talking to you earlier for prep on this, just. For me, I just bury all of my autobiographical things, or all of the viewpoints that I might have or feelings I might have in robot metaphors.
I'm also a coward who hides behind metaphors, so
yeah.
I feel that.
Yeah, so and then with her, it's kind of when I was a kid, I used to jam plastic dolls together to try to figure out how sex worked. And,
which is relatable, because
right.
I also had that memory as a kid with Barbies in the basement, being oh, this is what I saw on the TV show, and then I would also have them ride dinosaurs, so it was all this exploration of the possibilities of life. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I mean, but you're right though. The things that we as human beings, we're kind of ashamed to talk about or too shy to talk about it. That's what's good, I think, about Nina's games, like How We Met in May, talking about the awkward, cute, fun absurdity of a new relationship, things like that, because everything we're not as individual people as unique as we think we are. We all have these experiences that are that each of us can relate to.
Yeah, even if it's not something that people are prone to talking about, using creating a game on that concept makes it easier to discuss that, in the lighthearted way with what's the how do you do it?
Yeah,
in a lighthearted way with that one. But then I also played her freshman year game, which is the game she was talking about sexual assault, where your character goes out to a club trying to meet up with a friend. The friend's not replying to her text messages, and then the bouncer starts hitting on her and the situation spirals. But even that one was like evocative of like real experiences that can be tough to talk about, but using a game to kind of like share that and be like, no other people go through that. It's really, I don't know, it's interesting, and it's kind of like freeing in a way to just see these experiences play out on this mass stage that everyone can discuss.
Yeah, and it helps people. It helps people, feel less alone. Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing. She's doing the Lord's work, that Nina Freeman. Okay, well, I think that's it.
Yeah.
For number 3. Yeah, we're still pretty new at this. I think.
Oh, I feel bad. We should have asked Nina to plug her games, where you can find them.
Yeah. We should do that. You can. Nina Says So.
Nina Says .so would be the
Says
website where you can find
so.
her independent work, and she's also working at Tacoma Developer Fulbright currently. So
yeah, she has so many games, and so many of them, you can download for free, or like a small donation too, or a large donation. Yeah. Listeners, give Nina a large donation. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Chris Graft.
I'm Alissa McAloon.
And don't forget to subscribe and to rate our review if you love us. Give us them 5 stars. That helps a lot. And say something nice about us. So thanks, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Bye.